This 90s reggae album has a secret prophecy that is shockingly relevant today. What Joseph Hill predicted inside these tracks will leave you speechless. Stick until the end to discover the one song that made critics question everything they knew about music, and the hidden warning most listeners completely missed the first time around. The One Stone album arrived like a revelation in 1996, 2 decades after the formation of culture and 20 years after Joseph Hill first set himself against the weight of Babylon with his commanding voice. By then, his journey had been marked by turbulence, splits, reunions, departures, and the painful reshaping of a band that never stopped carrying the torch of Rastafari truth. Kenna days had gone, Albert Walker remained, and into fold stepped Iriolano Malomo, a vocalist drawn from the ranks of Dub Mystic, the powerful backing band that had already proven itself in live settings. Hill's choice to anchor the studio recording with Dub Mystic was more than convenience. It was a moment he fused old prophetic fire with new instrumental chemistry, creating a work of unflinching brilliance. Recorded at Kingston's Mixing Lab Studios, the album bore the weight of history, spirituality, and Joseph Hill's own restless urgency. What emerged was not merely a collection of songs, but a musical sermon that blurred the line between chant and prophecy. From the very first notes, the album set its standard with Addis Ababa. The track unfurled like a hymn of longing and devotion, horns rising with stately grace, as though heralding the presence of Haile Selassie himself. Joseph Hill's tribute was not empty nostalgia, but a living, breathing exaltation of Ethiopia's sacred ground, the throne of the King of Kings. He sang not as a detached observer, but as a pilgrim whose feet already trod the soil of Zion in spirit. The music was brief, just over 3 minutes, but it carried a majesty that outlived its running time. It was a sunrise, a glimpse of holy radiance that set the emotional compass of the entire album. Listeners could feel the drums reverberate like footsteps on hallowed ground, and by the time the final notes faded, it felt less like an ending than the opening of a doorway. That doorway opened into the shimmering landscape of A Slice of Monsignor, a track both playful in rhythm and profoundly spiritual in message. Trumpets dance, bass lines roll like ocean tides, and the percussion sparkled with a warmth that was impossible to resist. Yet beneath the bounce lay the stern heartbeat of Rastafari wisdom. Joseph Hill, in his gravel-edged tenor, urged listeners to shun materialism, to abandon the false idols of wealth and power, and instead walk humbly before Jah. His delivery had the conviction of a man who lived his words, who saw himself as a mat at Zion's doorway, willing to be trampled if it meant others could step into the presence of righteousness. This fusion of irresistible groove and devotional fervor transformed the track into one of the album's crown jewels, embodying culture's genius from marrying melody to moral clarity. The title track, One Stone, shifted the atmosphere with sharp wit and fearless commentary. Hill declared with mischievous defiance that a single act of resistance, a stone cast by a Rastaman, was enough to unsettle the wicked and strip away their illusion of invulnerability. Here was Joseph Hill at his cheekiest, mocking Babylon with humor sharpened into prophecy. He evoked Nelson Mandela's release after decades in prison as proof of empire's fragility, daring to laugh at the mighty whose foundations were crumbling. The rhythm swung between light-hearted bounce and militant undertone, echoing the duality of the message, both jest and judgment, ridicule and revolution. It was the voice of a man unafraid to trouble the conscience of power. From there came Bull War, a track that cloaked serious warning in a playful mask. Hill's laughter threaded through his plea for unity, urging the people to abandon strife and seek harmony. The rhythm was buoyant, almost comic, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. Violence destroys, division corrodes, and only togetherness can heal. By delivering the message with humor, Hill made it impossible to ignore. The listener chuckled, nodded, and then, perhaps without realizing, absorbed the weight of his call for peace. It was classic Joseph Hill, turning moral teaching into a song that entertained even as it instructed. Then the album bared its teeth with Blood a Go Run. Gone was the humor, replaced by the drumbeat of impending judgment. From the first military-styled roll, the track carried the menace of marching armies, a stern warning to Babylon that its days were numbered if injustice continued unchecked. The synthesizers growled low, keyboards flickered like sparks in the dark, and the voice of Joseph Hill became that of a prophet on the battlefield. He was no longer pleading or cajoling. He was declaring that a new generation, forged in fire, would rise with vengeance. The performance of Dub Mystic on this track was thunderous, particularly Noah Powell's drumming, which hammered the warning into the listener's bones. This was reggae not as entertainment, but as spiritual warfare, as unflinching prophecy. I shifted gears again, its sorrowful tone cutting through with haunting lament. Hill revisited an older composition from the International Herb era, but here, reborn through Dub Mystic's musicianship, it acquired fresh poignancy. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who had shown the truth again and again, only to watch the world stumble blindly into folly. The remade track became both personal confession and collective cry, its weary honesty resonating deeply with listeners who knew the frustration of speaking wisdom into deaf ears. It was less a song than a sigh wrapped in rhythm, a spiritual ache translated into melody. Mr. Sluggard and Get Them Soft followed, two sharp critiques masquerading as lighthearted numbers. The first targeted the epidemic of idleness, exposing the rot of wasted potential among men unwilling to shoulder responsibility. Hill's scorn was laced with humor, but his tone carried an urgency that cut past laughter. The second track dove into the scourge of illegal substance use, its jaunty surface disguising the gravity of the issue. Joseph Hill knew that music was a weapon, and with these songs, he wielded ridicule and rhythm against the forces of decay that threatened to hollow out his community. By making listeners laugh and dance, he slipped the medicine into their souls without resistance. Down in Babylon arrived like a sudden wave of grief, the album's most sobering moment. Hill's voice trembled with sorrow as he mourned the decline of Rastafari's visible presence in Jamaica. He remembered the men who built schools, tilled the land, spread wisdom, and embodied liberty with dignity. Where were they now? The streets that once teemed with dreadlocked teachers and builders now seemed barren. Their numbers diminished, their fire dimmed. The music was steady and mellow, a rhythm that lulled even as it broke hearts, allowing Hill's words to strike deeper. It was a sound of memory colliding with present reality, of a prophet watching his own movement dwindle. For many listeners, it was a track that lingered longest, its tears mingling with their own. Out of that sorrow rose Rastaman, a Nyabingi-driven chant of judgment and hope. Here, Hill was no longer lamenting but warning. Prepare for the arrival of Rastafari on the day of reckoning. His voice carried the cadence of ancient drumming, urging righteousness, holiness, and readiness. The track was elemental, stripped down to the roots of chant and drum, echoing traditions that stretch back to the earliest gatherings of Rastafari brethren. It was both reminder and prophecy, a call to vigilance in a world prone to forgetfulness. The album closed with Girls, 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 a track that teased with its title only to reveal Joseph Hill's sly humor and fatherly admonition. Far from slackness, it was a rebuke to promiscuity, urging young men to forsake the temptation of juggling countless women and instead build families with fidelity and love. The rhythm was playful, the tone light, but the underlying lesson was serious. Righteousness begins at home, in the choices of love and responsibility. Ending the album with this number was a stroke of genius, a way of leaving listeners with a smile and a teaching that lingered long after the final note. Taken together, the 12 tracks of One Stone form more than an album. They are a chronicle of mid-1990s Jamaica, filtered through the eyes of a Rastaman who saw both the laughter and the blood, the promise and the peril. Joseph Hill used humor, sorrow, defiance, and prophecy as tools, shaping a narrative that was as much sermon as song. The musicianship of Dub Mystic elevated his words, wrapping them in instrumentation that was at once hypnotic and unrelenting. Every track was indispensable. No filler, no waste, only truth delivered in rhythm and rhyme. Hill's consistency was astounding, his prophetic voice resonant, his artistry uncompromising. Many critics continue to hold 2-7's clash as culture's crowning achievement, and indeed that 1977 masterpiece remains a cornerstone of reggae. Yet One Stone stands alongside it as a flawless late-period triumph, proof that Joseph Hill's vision never dimmed, that his pen never dulled, that his fire never cooled. Even 10 years before his death, he was producing work that rivaled his earliest classics, weaving timeless lessons into music that sounded as fresh in 1996 as it does now, decades later. Listening to One Stone is to hear prophecy echo, to feel history vibrate, to sit at the feet of a Rasta teacher who never stopped instructing. It is an album that cannot be skipped, cannot be diluted, cannot be ignored. In its laughter, in its warnings, in its tears, it remains a living testament of Joseph Hill's undying spirit. Which track from One Stone speaks the loudest truth to you? Do you hear Joseph Hill more as a prophet, a teacher, or a rebel in this album? Drop your reflections in the comments so we can reason together. And if you want more deep dives into reggae's overlooked masterpieces, then subscribe right now so you never miss the next revelation.